National recognition award. Okay, what sets you apart?
And I always kind of provoke this in my team. You do kind of see around a corner. Continue to be curious. I think it's such an underrated skill. Ask the next question. Approach everything with a sense of optimism, like we can do it. When I think about academic innovation and part of the secret sauce, yeah, we can do this. Maybe we can't do it all right now at the same time. We can do this. We will do it. How do we create an environment where faculty and students can do their best creative, innovative work to make our faculty feel like they've got partners and a place to come for ideas, and also to help our students have a really extraordinary experience?
She's a national award winner, a risk taker, and her team is reshaping the future of learning, one pilot at a time. In today's episode, you'll hear from Dr. Melissa Vito, the Vice Provost inspiring the team at the Academic Innovation Center at UT San Antonio. From launching bold pilots to building a resilient, future-ready faculty, she's reshaping the student experience. Stick around to find out how leadership curiosity can lead to pilots that redefine what is possible. Dr. Melissa Vito, welcome to the show. Please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do.
Thanks, Ryan. I'm Melissa Vito, as Ryan said, and I am the Vice Provost for Academic Innovation. And it's an area that didn't exist at UT San Antonio until sometime in the 2019-20. And so it's been very fun to lead this area, and the area focuses on really at the end of the day, how do we create an environment where faculty and students can do their best creative, innovative work to make our faculty feel like they've got partners and a place to come for ideas, and also to help our students have a really extraordinary experience. And we manifest it through our fully online programs. That's part of our area that we've been building over the past few years. Our professional and continuing education area, where we focus on adult learners who are coming back sometimes for a credential, sometimes just to upskill, but we want to make sure their experience is really, really astounding. And then teaching, learning, digital transformation, our video production area, and our classroom technology are all sort of wrapped around how do we focus on our faculty and how do we create really an environment and have the talent to be able to help support them with ideas, whether it's tools, a thought, technology. And then I would say, finally, how do we measure the impact to think about what we're doing and make sure that it's actually doing what we hope it is, or maybe be doing something we didn't expect, but it's equally good. So that's kind of the big picture for what we do. I like to have fun in my work and life. And so I think we have a pretty fun division of committed team members who are open to trying new ideas and testing things.
National recognition awards, all of which would appeal to an understanding from our faculty and student audience. But they're all wondering, okay, what sets you apart specifically? What is it that you're doing that makes such a huge impact on the lives of faculty, students, course creators, young professionals? And I know it's a hard question to answer because it's such a big question, but if you could tell us the most important things, what do you think they are?
Big picture, people who've known me over years because I've worked at other institutions and done some consulting always will say, and I always kind of provoke this in my team, you do kind of see around a corner. Not always, not everything. And yet I am a dot connector. So if I walk through an airport and I see people suddenly see behavior of what people are reading or whatever, I can't help but notice it. And I can't help but think about what that means for how we're moving forward, for what we're doing. I approach life like that generally. And that really helps in an area around academic innovation. And so the good news is sometimes I do just see things that I know maybe other people don't. We actually, during the pandemic, I met with our institutional research lead, Steve Wilkerson, who's awesome, and said, hey, could we fund a position that would work with our area? That was pretty rare that we would have somebody like that. They generally work in institutional research, focus on student success. But I just thought we got to see what we're doing if it matters that we do put all this time and effort working with our faculty. And so he's like, sure. So we did. He found an awesome person. And actually, it's becoming a point of distinction for us. It's also becoming something that people are starting to talk about more nationally and other schools are doing. And so some of it is just thinking about the opportunities that aren't obvious to people. And then for my team, trying to help them see things that they don't necessarily see, but take a leap of faith and realize how it aligns with our core values, and then feel safe in trying things. One of the first things I did was work with my team to learn the meaning of the word pilot. And so that is how we approach so much of what we do, because it manages expectations, creates an environment to experiment, and then hey, if it works, it's like a tradition and we expand it and we do it. If it doesn't work, it was just a pilot and we learned some things.
The ability to take risks often is given to the startup, to the smaller organization, but leading such a large organization, it's harder to take these kinds of risks. And you've taken specific risks that have paid off huge. Can you talk about some of the biggest challenges that have been solved by this risk-taking approach and this pilot approach?
I can think of two things kind of top of mind. And I would also say one of our core values is to collaborate. So, I sidebar, we do a lot of work with student success, graduate education, with our partners. And I think that has really serve to help the team see the bigger picture and also help us build cheerleaders and people with whom we want to work and we do better works. So there's that. But a couple of examples, I would say during the pandemic, it was turn around and do this. And I was determined that out of that, we had to have some jewels. We had to keep our eye on the prize. And so Dave Silva, who was Dean of Science at the time, and I co-chaired the group that sort of looked at our modalities, and what we would do. And we embedded in that we had to create a space and resources to do some experimenting and to focus on it. And so, Ryan, we had a interdisciplinary project that we had 5 different academic areas, students all remote, but kind of describing through their academic lens the pandemic experience, and was really awesome. We ended up doing a presentation in the Buena Vista Theater after it was all over, and we had other types of things where we really tried to make sure that there were some real opportunities. Not everything was an amazing success. I thought we use Pressbooks that helps us be able to create kind of our own resources and textbooks. And so we thought we could use that and our students could memorialize their experiences. Our students are used to like social media, quick, throw out a couple things. Stuff like that actually became almost more of a barrier for some of our students because it put too high of an expectation. So not everything sticks, but we try it. And it worked for us. A couple of my team members and I have written a chapter for a book about this. We have received some national recognition from some areas, and we developed things that are enduring and helping us do our work. We have a group of faculty champions who are faculty from every single academic department on campus who at that time had some experience with digital learning. But, it's a group that didn't want to quit after the pandemic. And now they're sort of the heart and soul of our ability to reach out to more faculty, to have a pulse on what's going on, and to look at issues, or opportunities, whether it's something like micro credentials or generative AI or anything in between. Then I would say the other area that I'm proud of our team about is how we stepped into generative AI, because I'm kind of competitive, and I also have a tendency to question the prevailing narrative. And so it doesn't mean the prevailing narrative is wrong, but I always kind of go, huh, is that, I wonder. So in November of 22, I actually had gotten my haircut and was listening to a podcast on my way home. And there was an interview with a woman who was a therapist who was using a tool. It was generative AI for certain levels of working with her clients. And I thought, this is fascinating. And so I did reach out to one of my team who leads teaching, learning, and digital transformation and just said, we got to check this out. And so we had it on our radar. And then in November, later, December, there was a whole lot of press about the dark cloud of generative AI and the big wide doors that were going to open to students cheating all over the place. And faculty would be left with nothing they could do. And I remember talking to the provost at the time, she's like, what do you want to do? And we got, and she's like, how can we be first? I'm like, this is how. And I said, we're going to go for it. We're not going to lead with any policies because that was also the sort of prevailing narrative. What kinds of policies do we need? And I have learned if you have an issue or an opportunity, if you start with a policy, you will totally miss the opportunity because it will be gone by the time you figure out what you need to do. And so I said, I think we have a lot of policies already. We look at academic integrity. We have a code of conduct. We have all the faculty develop their certain qualities in their syllabi. So let's, number one, no policies. This is an opportunity to experiment. Let's keep our eye on the prize. And so we pulled our faculty together, and that faculty champion group was a very big part of the initial group and continues to be part of it, along with other faculty. When I talk about the faculty that we have, they represent everything from physics to math to writing to communication to everything in between. And the faculty have been amazing at trying stuff out. Cybersecurity, we're now a couple years into it, and I continue to have colleagues who just are like, how did you do that? Our faculty are the hearts of it. And we've included career services and institutional research, and we're measuring impact. We did a study with our cyber class to look at what we might be seeing when you use generative AI, and we're encouraging faculty to use it for assessment and other kinds of areas. It's just kind of, I thought that was a risk worth taking. And we hosted a conference on behalf of the UT system last year where much of the system is starting to jump into it, but we're looking at kind of where we go next, maybe something the end of this semester. It's great. Those are two examples, but again, can't do it without a team, but I think I'm able to sometimes just jump out and help people feel empowered.
I'm so glad you mentioned AI because I want to dig deeper because of the leadership that has happened around this topic. And not only the leadership, but the speed at which guidelines support collaborations have happened at this level. At other places, you don't see that kind of support. You see faculty self-organizing, which is great, but it's trial and error. And unfortunately, trial and error doesn't take us as fast as real research from the field. So let's dive deeper into what works with AI and what doesn't.
We have a faculty group, and you know them well, Ryan. And I have to thank you too. You were from day one interested, and our first speaker when we started our webinar series, February 3rd of 2024. And you talked about what it is. It would be kind of interesting to go back and listen to it, to see what what might have changed. Thinking about what do we know about what works or what doesn't work. I would say it is a continually moving answer. What works for faculty is to make sure that faculty feels supported so that they can try things, that there are opportunities to learn. We need to do more work around helping faculty understand tools and what's out there and what might be available. What we're seeing is that faculty who are really interested, and this, are using it in really different ways. And so I think in some ways, and it may be what we've seen in the course that we're looking at doing some research on, the faculty or students may feel more engaged, and faculty may feel more engaged because they're playing with their curriculum or using something different. And yet I also know that our faculty member who is part of the committee, our team of peer learning faculty and leading the math department from spring of 24 was really interested in how to use generative AI to promote critical thinking, to not necessarily have our students have an easy pathway to a right answer, but to actually maybe have an easy pathway to a wrong answer, or to have something happen that will really make them pause and understand and think critically. And I think that's a really important potential area that generative AI can actually help, because it is so important for all of us who use it successfully to be critical thinkers. And this may bring, and we know we need this, but it may be that generative AI brings that issue to life in a way that more people respond to it than have been doing so far. So I think making sure so what's worked are some of those examples. Big picture, making sure the faculty feel supported, that whatever guidelines we develop, we're doing them in partnership with faculty. We just have done a refresh on them, and we will every year until we reach a point that things feel fairly stable. Take a look back and see if we need to tweak some language, do something different, but making sure that faculty always feel like we're partners and that our best role can be to help provide some expertise or an outlet to try ideas. So those are some things that we're seeing. I think an interesting thing we learned when you asked about what didn't work or what did, we meet regularly with student government, and I started that during the pandemic because I feel like it's important. So early on, we really saw for probably the first 3 or 4 months, faculty much more knowledgeable and much more engaged in generative AI than our students. And most of them came back from break not thinking, well, I have a new way to cheat. Most of them came back from break not even thinking about this. And so I think it was a slower engagement on the part of our students than most people thought would be the case.
So way back before generative AI hit the scene, you and I had the opportunity to present at Adobe Max, which was a highlight of my professional career. So among the many reasons I have to thank you, and I wanted to talk to you, the kind of support that is given leads to specific outcomes that we can celebrate. And in our Max presentation, we were specifically celebrating the fact that we were an Adobe Creative Campus. I got to call myself an Adobe Creative Campus Faculty Fellow, in part thanks to the high-level training that was provided. There's so many programs like this. And what I'd like to dive deeper in is what you mentioned was the evaluations. There are specific outcomes that are to be celebrated. I know the Adobe Creative Campus is one of those, but I know there's others too. Can you speak to some of the big celebration points for academic innovation at UTSA?
Big celebration points, sometimes they're big and sometimes they're little, but they're big. I am going to go back to the impact measurement because part of what got me thinking about doing this was the fact that before I had come here, I had been at a campus that was an Adobe Creative Campus. We were first in what was then, rest in peace, the Pac 12. And so, anyways, so I had some familiarity with it. I knew that it had potential impact if faculty were using it as, for curricular stuff, but there hadn't been any measurement of that. So there was some work done, and part of it was a thought that I had had to look at the impact of using Adobe Creative Cloud in courses on student outcomes. And an external group, Civitas Learning, which does a lot of work around this, student success, did the analysis and built it. I helped inform it. Adobe was engaged. But we saw students got higher grades. They had lower DFW rates. Different types of students were impacted more significantly. But I took away from that if students have something that engages them more, or if faculty have something that engages them more, it does impact student success. Then we're also in the pandemic. Then we also are able to hire someone. But then we started looking at our other types of programs. And when we've done a few course transformations, looking at big courses that affect thousands of our students. So we found in our first course transformation, lower DFW rates significantly, higher rates of A's and B's. Look at the bottom line success rates from our students. And I had read a piece in the Chronicle back a few years ago that a woman, Beth McMurtry, had written, and she had kind of said, universities have put so much effort into student retention, whether it's summer programs, tutoring, writing centers, all kinds of things. And at some point, you reach a place where it's hard to continue to make significant progress. And so it's time that we think about the role of faculty. I always quote her because that is what we've done. But we've seen it through course transformations. We've seen it through embedding different tools. That's why we were interested in looking at generative AI. And we haven't been able to do full analysis. So all we know so far is lower rates of DFW, but we're checking. We have some faculty development programs that some AQ is a national organization. We're doing analysis there. We're seeing, again, the analysis isn't done yet, but we're seeing lower rates of DFWs. We're part of the student experience program, which includes really a full engagement of our faculty in terms of course development and course of how they understand students. But we're seeing there, again, lower rates of DFWs, higher rates of A's and B's. And so for me, That to me is like worth celebrating. And I think that the team is understanding that. The fact that we require that if you teach in our fully online program, the courses need to be built through teaching, learning in our digital transformation area. We can guarantee that our students in our fully online programs that are starting in our new programs where our courses have been developed, they're going to get the best of class. They're going to have the best shot at doing well. It won't be any different than our residential students. That's really important. And so that sense of sort of elevating the quality, but knowing that it matters and having that pervasive around the division is huge. And that's given us a platform to talk about it nationally and at conferences and we need to do some writing and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, that to me is a big celebration point. The Academic Innovation Center is a celebration point, just having it, because that was an opportunity that back when I was consulting here and the provost had mentioned they were going to be moving some things around. I remember meeting with a couple of the team members saying, what if we did this? And we were able to do it. And that is awesome as a physical space for what it can promote in terms of faculty community, bringing more students in, areas where you can experiment with stuff. But it also is a symbolic statement to have right in the center of campus an academic innovation center, right across from a lot of our student success areas, a celebration point. I know that the division all has taken pride in.
I have engaged with almost probably every program you just mentioned because I'm obsessed with teaching and learning and specifically asynchronous online communication. And the ACUE was a highlight because there are things that you learn in that course that you may have heard might be a good idea, but you never actually implement. And it gives you an opportunity to implement with a cohort of faculty. So I have stories of success from that. I have stories of success from Quality Matters and from Adobe, obviously. And most recently, in the past 2 years, you mentioned the Student Experience Project. And the first year or so of the Student Experience Project was focused on how do I improve these specific measures? What can I do? And what little tweaks can I make? And the smallest tweaks can make the biggest difference. Communicating at this point about this one thing, or putting a survey at this point with these specific kinds of questions, then you see a clear outcome on us on the pre and post at the beginning of the course and the end of the course. And it's so exciting. And most recently, the student partnerships program where we're collaborating with students and I'm able to say, hey, what in this course can I improve to help with these dimensions? And I have a conversation with a student after collaborating with faculty so long. That's been so refreshing. So I want to hear some of the stories you've heard that are like my stories, where I'm like, I just added a quote and I added a survey and I had this huge impact on student belonging. What else did I do here? Is that really the only tweak I made? And it's seeing that those kinds of evaluations at the end where they're like, this made a huge impact on my life. Thank you. It's so professionally rewarding. And I know you've heard stories other than just from me, from faculty.
No, we have. In fact, one of the partnerships that I'm really proud of is I had worked with a program that we'd had where we'd give faculty money to do some events with students outside the classroom and talk to my partner, Tammy Wyatt, in student success. And it's like, I love it. How can we do that? And now there is a faculty mini grant program that we know makes a big difference for students. But what you just said is something that I had observed. And actually, when I did my doctorate, this was a topical area. This is what I looked at. Everyone knows that really excellent student faculty interaction leads to higher outcomes for students. Like you described those little things, but it also leads to higher levels of engagement, happiness, satisfaction, accomplishment for faculty. You describing that was amazing. Going to the first event of SEP faculty coming together to kind of celebrate. It was in the Academic Innovation Center. I describe it as like for some of the faculty, I felt like I was in a therapy session because they were so personal about what they had learned about students, but what it meant for them as human beings going beyond being faculty, that it was really transformative. And again, just little things. And it also reinforces it's not a top line narrative, but there's always a perception that do faculty really care that much? And they do. But seeing that is like, I wanted to record every minute of that. One of the areas of opportunity And one of the areas where we aren't operating at a high of a level as I think we could is to tell more of these stories in meaningful ways.
I just gave a presentation with the online program about asynchronous online teaching and best practices, and a lot of those I was able to pull. A lot of the best practices I was able to pull from my experience in ACUE, my experience in SEP, the Emerging Technology Partners Program. There's these little things that make a huge difference. So for our faculty listening, and maybe for our students too, who may want to be course creators one day in or outside of higher education, what are some of the specific things? Like for me, it was this little survey question and this little adding quotes and modules all of a sudden made it seem to make a difference. And these little things that faculty can do or course creators can do can add up. What are those small actions that you've seen have big payoffs?
The things you described for sure. This is not a small action, but it was a aha moment. When I think of that conversation with SEP faculty, I think the recognition that students feeling a sense of connection and belonging in their classes was important, and that what you do could make a difference, I think was really life-changing for some of the faculty. Just that recognition and then learning some small things was an important piece, and a lot of it for students is just being clear. When we have talked to students, and you probably hear it, they just wanna know what is okay or what's not okay, and that's why for the syllabi that our faculty develop, really the only thing we want them to do around generative AI is let students know whether or not they can use it. So we have a few statements, but we don't wanna constrict how, why, or what, because students do need a sense of clarity. And these are not little tips, but this is an important thing I've learned. Students want to know that their faculty are people. I still remember when like my kids were in school, not forever ago in college, it gave me a really good focus group all the time. And I remember one of my sons called me, he was a journalism major, and he said, "Mom, I just had the greatest conversation with a faculty member." She happened to be part of our faculty fellow program, so I knew her. And he said, her favorite group is Wilco. And at that moment, that's who Zach was really into. And it was that small, had nothing to do with the class, had nothing to do with anything else, but it just made Susan Knight was her name, feel like a person. And that was really important. And it impacts student motivation. They want to do better if they feel like there is some kind of connection. The small thing is be a little bit personal. Let your students know you're a person. I think that's important, along with some of the tips that you had. We track student for our online program because students are so connected to the campus in a different way. We aren't seeing them in person. The faculty, almost by and large, their responses to our faculty are really, really positive. So you should take that as a big point of pride.
Absolutely. And I know that there are specific pain points in the teaching and learning journey for both students and faculty. And I know that in working with academic innovation and these collaborations, it's so much less painful than working alone, right? It's not just because I have the expertise of an instructional designer or a cohort leader or a specific program like SEP or the Emerging Technology Partners Program or ACUE. It's also that kind of checking in, right? To get rid of those pain points. So can you speak to how pain points are solved for students specifically by faculty in collaboration with academic innovation?
It's a good question because big picture in what we've been talking about is how we also build a sense of community for our students. So pain points from students for students, and we know that well-being and mental health is a significant issue. Anxiety is something that more and more of our students we know feel. So I think for students, faculty members' ability to make a student feel like they belong or feel like they're heard or feel like there is a flexibility inherent that you're looking at what a student needs to do, but you also are looking at who they are, I think is really important. I think we're in an era with students, if we think about the students that they're the traditional students that are on our campus now, they've been through pandemic in high school, so a disrupted time and it changes. It's interesting looking at some of the research, and I'm sure you are too, now about whether or not people are spending more time alone, whether these are permanent changes, whether things are good or bad. And I don't think, like a lot of research, it's raising a lot of questions, which I think is important, without necessarily providing a template of how to address things, because it just may be the evolution of things. Pain points for students are to make sure that they feel like they're heard, and that they have a faculty member who cares, that they can be excited about their curriculum. Everything you've described in terms of timing of a survey, when you ask something, where you put your midterms, if you do midterms, the smaller, low stakes kinds of experiences are really promote better learning for students and are less stressful. And recognizing some of who our students are, I think it's not a template approach to pain points. Those are all things, though, that faculty probably haven't consciously thought about, that make a difference for our students. Student pain points, from my conversations and talking to them, really do revolve around, feeling like they can connect to a faculty member. They have somebody that they can talk to. They know a place to go for support. If they are dealing with issues, there's an opportunity to have some flexibility. One of the things that we first heard, I'm answering my own question, about generative AI, and it was from our partners in the writing program, from students. And this was early spring, the semester that we were starting with stuff, is that they loved it because it was a super anonymous tutor that had breadth of information. And so they didn't feel embarrassed about having to ask questions. So interesting thing about me is that my background wasn't in teaching and learning. It was really in more student affairs, and then online learning, and then student retention and success. I've always kept a strong connection to faculty. So I didn't come up through instructional design or some of those places that you expect that to happen. So I'm not that person that can build your course with you, but I'm definitely that person who can help you understand how building that course in a way that makes our students feel valued, and that times the things that you do well, and that doesn't make students feel like everything is life and death. It makes a really big difference.
And the instructional designers that you're mentioning, the people who are in charge of our instructional designers and helping them to do their job better, all benefit from this leadership picture that you're articulating at the top. It takes vision to do what you've done, to get the national recognition that you've done and the awards that you've done. In articulating your vision for your teams and for the entire organization, in many cases, what are some of the things that you have articulated as story? In other words, the story is, we are going to move in this direction. Well, Dr. Vito, why should I do that? And I know you're excellent at getting that kind of buy-in, which I think would benefit all of our listeners in terms of, what's your secret to storytelling?
So I was a journalism major. And I went to school young. I skipped a grade, all this kind of stuff. So it took me a while to figure out what I wanted to do, and was an English major before that. The biggest takeaway that I had from that is that I always think about my audience first. And so I know I have things that I think are important, but I also look at a group, whether it's my team or whether it's provost team, a president's cabinet meeting, or in other settings where I've talked to regents or whatever. I'm always trying to think about what they might be thinking about. I'm also aware of the fact that people don't have a lot of time right now and long attention. So if I can't tell a story, if I can't make it personal, gonna lose most of your audience. So I do try to find personal intersections, and I try to have, you know, descriptions. Like when we talk about one of our core values around generative AI being that we don't want to use generative AI to replace creativity, but we want to use it as a way that supports or amplifies creativity. That came from you at our first peer learning conference. It's a great story, and I've told that multiple times as why that is an important value that's part of our vision, but you just spontaneously said it and it brought it to life. And so I think storytelling is about how you connect the dots rather than sharing like a bunch of data. And I talk to my team about this a lot. You lose an audience when you're telling them, we worked with 4,280 faculty last year. We had, 610 X, we had this, we had that. If you can create a context. It's important. A point of pride for our teaching, learning, and digital transformation area. And literally, I found this just when we were filling out an application for an award, and I was just sitting around looking at research. The national average for most areas is that they support about 25 to 30% of their faculty, individually that they know of. And we looked at our data for 23, 24 was about 60% of our faculty. That tells a story that brings it to life in a way that is way different than saying we worked with, 342 faculty last year. That is like, oh, okay, so is that good or bad? But telling that piece of it really then creates the anchor point to be able to say why that might be, the kinds of things that we do, what we know about faculty. I think storytelling is being able to find a personal intersection, thinking about your audience, knowing people are busy. So they don't come when I'm talking to them, they're not like, oh, I can't wait to hear what she's got to say. They're probably like, I've got 22 minutes and what do we need to do here? So how do I find a point of engagement? And that's generally something, a story or personal or something that will bring to life what I'm talking about. And then when we're thinking about data, being strategic about it. I'm forever, if my team were here, they would like roll their eyes. I'm forever saying, we are not writing dissertations every day. And so what we need to know, we need to have regular pulse data about what people are thinking and feeling. And that tells us what we need to know for most of what we do. If we're looking at impact of courses on student success, that's a full out study. But for most of what we need to know, we just need to ask some questions and then use that to inform what we do. So trying to build more, socialize that more with our team. So I'm always sending examples and helping bring it to life. And then we did an exercise at one of my team leadership meetings where I just asked people to bring in their favorite Instagram reels and like why they liked them and what that might mean for what we do. Because we also forget that all of our members of our community, whether it's you, whether it's our students, whether it's our president, whoever, all exist in a world. So we think of ourselves as like higher ed, and we're always comparing ourselves to higher ed. But in terms of experience, our students compare their experience to what it's like going to a restaurant off campus, what it's like ordering something off of Amazon. There is an expectation around how you're going to describe your relevance. And so I always try to think about what are the best experiences that people have outside of higher ed, and how does that inform a little bit of what we do? And then how do I use that to help my team think about what that means?
What does it look like to take something that works in other industries and apply it to engaging students? Because you mentioned engagement too. Hey, this engages businesses with their clients. How can I then use that to engage our students or our faculty?
For students, a lot of it is making sure you're having conversations, that they feel heard, that you're responsive. I mean, students are used to quick responses. That's not typically what we do. And so trying to light a fire around how we respond, I think is important. Using what we hear and then letting students know this is what we've heard and this is why we're doing this. One example of that is we meet with student government regularly. Last year, or over the past year and a half or so, increasingly we've had more graduate students engaged. And an issue came up that was really valid. They said, we're grad assistants, and so we're teaching or we're supporting our faculty, but we fall in this gray area because you focus on faculty. A lot of the communication is to faculty or students, and we're sort of in this area. So we talked to Marcella and we were both in that meeting, and it informed changes that we've made in how we now include grad assistants, teaching assistants. So when we looked at the faculty guidelines, we made sure we had representation from teaching assistants, but we also make sure that we let student government know we're doing that. It is big and little things that you do, but I think it's listening to people. It's moving quickly where you can. It is being personal so that you don't feel like you're just working with a bureaucracy, which is why I always lead with, we didn't start with policies, which can be stunning for some audiences, and others is like, oh yeah, That's exactly the right thing to do. That's why pulse data is important. You learn little nuggets that can inform something that's meaningful that you don't necessarily see on the surface. A lot of it is in response, listening, telling people you're listening, so letting people know what you heard informed what you did, and then keeping regular groups of students and faculty that you connect with so that you're listening to people. I used to oversee in a previous role our student union, and we had our food service that was not outsourced, it was ours, and they were so proud of stuff they were doing and all this, and I was like, "That's great." But here's the thing, our students are comparing you to Chipotle, not to food service at another school. You gotta remember, like, who your competitors are, and that applies in less obvious ways even in this setting.
You mentioned who your competitors are. I want to seize on that because I know you have probably learned important lessons and taken action based on what you've seen competitors doing. What did that look like?
I have. I love that a few schools, including UT Austin and Julie Schell is terrific there. They've been able to develop their own generative AI tool that they're using in faculty development. I'm kind of jealous about that. And I'm kind of thinking, schools that have done that are generally organized a little bit differently so that you've got a level of expertise that's a little bit more engaged in this area. And I think a couple years down the road, we would be totally positioned for that. I love the new college that we're putting together and seeking leadership for now. And so I think that we can be positioned. But the competitive side of me is like, rats. I hate that other people have beaten us to that. So that's something that I've seen that I'm like, yes. And maybe our opportunity will be not to have been first, but to have learned and to have something that is maybe more relevant in that moment. So that's an example. I am inconsistent in LinkedIn and sharing what we do. It's just me. I go through periods where I'm like, okay, I got it. And then the rebellious side of me is like, I'm done. I'm tired of this. And I'm just going to take a break. And so, but I watch some peers that are just really great and religious about a consistent drumbeat around things that are happening. So a more consistent drumbeat is something I think about of telling our story. We have some peers that I look at are writing more about what's happening. And I think I write inconsistently, though trying to look at how we can get a little bit more out there, in that setting that amplifies talking. We're a place that people kind of are starting to come to look to, though. We had during EDUCAUSE, we had a number of colleagues and people that we hosted at the Academic Innovation Center from both internationally. We had people from Japan and France and Canada and, all around who were here to see it. And colleagues from, North Carolina and other places in the country. We do set something there. I think some of our peers have been, um, a little bit more on it relative to, tools and tech. That doesn't equal creativity, but at all, but it does engage people in wanting to try things. So I would like to create more of a expertise in our area because we don't have as much as I think we could. So I would say some of those things I see, and then basically storytelling. I want us to be better. So some schools, some places are.
I love to hear that you were a communication major as someone teaching communication. We're right now in the beginning phases of trying to create a journalism department. So I'm very excited about that. We just approved the digital media influence degree. So excited about these kinds of big changes happening in the communication department.
What would be interesting would be how you think about journalism for the future. What is journalism in a post-truth? What is all of that? This is an awesome time to be starting a journalism program in terms of positioning it, you know?
Yeah, we're looking at other journalism programs and like, wow, we could really differentiate ourselves uniquely by doing this, this, and this, and that's what we're working on now. Yeah, it's exciting. So you've talked about leadership, you've talked about evaluations, you've talked about this kind of process, but could you articulate a framework for those who are looking to develop faculty programs and student success that people listening could write down and take home? Like, it starts with research, and then we go into what? What's next?
I think it starts with the why and the what. So, what are we doing and why are we doing it? And many traditional teaching and learning centers are really focused on faculty development, but don't make an explicit connection to student success. And so, I remember at the start of the pandemic when I think I was still part time, whatever, it was like the very first big kind of open forum, virtual one that we had for the community. And I was speaking and I just said, we will be working with faculty to build the best quality courses we can to impact student success. And that was probably the first time we actually explicitly connected those dots. And then it just became part of our culture. So I would say a framework should include a why. So it is support for faculty. And at the end of the day, all of what we do should also lead to increased student success or engagement, however you look at that. So I think that more modern framework looks at that. I think a more modern framework also, we brought together what had been two separate areas, teaching and learning in the one area that typically at campuses is very faculty focused, looks at pedagogy, does a lot of the traditional work. And then we had digital learning that people think about as sort of tools and tech and online. And so we brought those areas together several years ago. From the start, it was that we would be modality agnostic and really driven by a vision of being an outlet for faculty and being supporting faculty with talent and expertise. So to also make sure that our students have the best experience. And so we kind of put all those pieces together. I remember a long conversation about whether or not we should put the word digital transformation in the title of everything. And I can't remember if you were there because some faculty were nervous that that might be off-putting because it sounds too inspirational, but we went with it anyways. And now I think it's socialized enough that, people see that. And then having a center was great. So having a sense of place, I think, is important. But I think being driven by a big mission, understanding that we don't live in an area where people are all bifurcated. And again, businesses would know that. So looking at ways that you bring things together that make sense. We've brought academic technology into the area around teaching, learning, and digital transformation because classrooms are, they're ubiquitous now. They're physical spaces, they're your bedroom. They're all over the place. And so we need to have an explicit, intentional way that we acknowledge that. And we know that these things all connect to how we work with our faculty. So that's also now kind of part of the evolution of that area. So I think a framework that acknowledges student success is a why we're doing what we're doing, very explicit, short, but aspirational, that positions us for the future. Because if we learned nothing through the pandemic and now through generative AI, it's that we are living in a moment of really an accelerated velocity of change. And so I think that we have to acknowledge that again in a very clear, said out loud way. When we hosted the conference last year around generative I wanted a keynote speaker that would be more of a futurist and not a generative AI expert. And that's actually we found a faculty member from Houston who runs a forecasting lab. It's a way to think about the future. There are a lot of different ways, but there is an area called future literacy that is, it was actually something that really came into being around 2019 or 20. And really it looks at what do students need for the future. And we talk about things like durable skills, like communication, blah, 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 which is true. And then you layer on, that's why micro credentials are great, some specific skills that might change, in a year or two. So you can gather those in different ways. But what future literacy at the nub of it talks about is that we need to be really building, encouraging, focusing on a resilient mindset in our students. And I also think in our faculty, because at the end of the day, students need to leave here clearly prepared for the workforce, and faculty need to feel confident in what they're doing. But that confidence has to know that it's going to change. So what you do really well right now, you might need to do differently, or a student may get laid off a year into their dream job for something that has nothing to do with how they're doing, but maybe because a business got acquired or because a skill set is shifting and they are downsizing an area. So I think resilience is an underrated skill and one that I think the area of future literacy is something that interests me, both in how we think about it for students, but also how we use it as a frame for working with our faculty and others and my team.
You created the UT System Conference looking at AI. And I remember one of the first keynote speakers was a future forecaster. And he talked about weak signals and strong signals. So continuing this thread about what you see happening and how we need to adjust to students and faculty through those weak and strong signals. Can you tell us what those look like?
I think one thing I wanted to do first, because I didn't do it, was acknowledge that the area of future literacy really came out of some UNESCO research back in 2019. Just as an aside, weak and strong signals. I mean, I think strong signals that we're seeing and supported by data is that our traditional students coming in are coming in with more mental health concerns, with a greater need for wellness support, higher rates of anxiety. We think about what does that mean? What does it mean for how we build courses? What does it mean for when we do breaks for people? That's a strong signal. And I really love that UTSA acknowledges that and is explicitly trying to think about some ways that may be traditional or maybe out of the box, but that can help students feel both supported and also less anxious. That's a strong signal. I would say that probably some of that also reverberates to our faculty and staff. So acknowledging that and looking for ways to help our faculty and our team members understand what is, you know, a have to do versus a can do it next semester. We're in people and information business, so the people piece of this is pretty critical, whether you're all remote or whether you're physically there. So I think in terms of strong signals, those are some strong signals. And I think interestingly, they're starting, there is more of a focus nationally now on making sure that people are in the office or they're physically, where things are. And I think there's a lot of good to that. It will help cities come back to life in some ways. It can help build community. There's nothing more important than that accidental conversation you have because you happen to pass somebody in the hallway or stay after a meeting. So all of those things are really good. And at the same time, I think we have to find a way that it works so that we aren't making students feel worse or faculty. And I think that everyone can still succeed in those environments. So I think that that's a strong signal. I think that honestly, these are big picture strong signals. I mean, I think the pace of change. I've talked with a colleague at the coordinating board, Michelle Singh, who's awesome, who is also really in sync on this, that we have to start talking out loud about how fast, the velocity of change. What does that mean? It doesn't disconnect from the previous strong signal, but like, how can we be looking around more so that we aren't caught flat footed or that we can anticipate more? And so I think in addition to building more of a resilient mindset, building some futurist skills, I think are important. And I don't know, it's like, I don't know how much you can teach versus how much you can't. Andy Hines, who was the speaker at our conference, was great and has some tools that I think can help people, learn. And actually his session was recorded because we wanted people to be able to access it afterwards. Weak signals, I thought it was fascinating. Everyone for a while looked at the data, was like, students aren't going to the universities anymore. Enrollment's down, freshman enrollment's down. Numbers, whatever, interesting this week. Actually, not so much. You need to look more carefully at where things are down before you write your headlines. The big picture there is that not everybody is choosing to go to college out of high school now, and I think that's fine, but I don't think it means that people are turning their backs on higher education. Our need to stay relevant and personal and tell our story well is important, but I think that we need to acknowledge we still have a strong, important product. We just need to be more future focused.
You mentioned traditional students, non-traditional students have risen. We have students who are, 30 plus at far greater numbers than we used to in our online programs. And working to adapt to their needs has been something that you've been seeking to support too.
And it's awesome. One thing I learned about online that, early on, here, is that online can actually influence residential. It can influence everything else we do in a positive way. Because online students, I remember when I was first doing some work here, and I would say the national average is X, and the best schools, if a student sends a text or an email at midnight, will be about 5 minutes later the best schools will respond to that student. And people were flabbergasted. But the reality is that quicker response is important for everyone. Having a clear understanding of what you need to get through a major is important for everyone. Making transfer easier or thinking about credit for prior learning that has a disproportionate positive impact for adult learners or older students is a benefit for everyone. A lot of what we do for online has had the other impact of helping people think through what we do for face to face. I remember an early conversation here where I was like, have we thought about doing some more like tutoring online or things like that? And this was pre-pandemic. And most people were like most schools thinking we really don't have the resources and it's important for students to come in. Reality is it's important for students to get services. And some hybrid is great because they can do stuff from their residence hall room or they can be face to face. Online has broken through some of those barriers and help really improve some of the things that we do. So, and also teaching online, that's where it first really became apparent that big high stake exams aren't necessarily, they don't match well to online teaching. And further, if you look at research, they aren't necessarily the best ways that students have enduringly learned. That more frequent lower stake exams are really a better experience. And that came out of online learning early on. I'm sure you know that because you teach that.
And I learned so much about how to do it thanks to the team, right? Like there's things that, oh, I thought I knew this was going to work. And then you learn it doesn't, or it does.
Exactly. But that benefits face to face too. It benefits the rest of what we do. So I remember a conversation with one of your colleagues, Chad, and during the pandemic, and he said, I never taught online before. And when I'm back face to face, biggest thing is I'm still going to use all these tools and technology. We've got people now know who we are nationally and also kind of locally. Some good things are happening. So the conference last year was great around generative AI. I want us to be seen as thought leaders in this area. But being thought leaders means we're thinking new thoughts. We're not just rehashing what's already out there. So for me, that's a big challenge and opportunity with my team and with those with whom we work to think that next thought, not our current thought, and not always be driven by capacity. So I'm working really hard on that. We are going to host, there is a group of people who came together in June of 23 in New Mexico to talk about what higher ed, past 50 years, pace of change, role of technology, what might the next 50 years look like? And some really good people initiated by Lev Gonick at ASU, who's terrific. Sam Becker does kind of creative consulting and others. I was invited, but there was a conference actually in Dublin, so I was there, but it was a great group. It's storytellers, mainly a lot of storytellers there, along with some technic technological expertise and some broad higher ed experience. And so that group decided to think about some scenarios on how to get people kind of thinking more concretely and to hold a conference. So there was a conference last spring at ASU at SkySong 100-year conference, and it was awesome. ASU has a great kind of living learning, I won't say residence hall, but it kind of is where retired community members can come and live there along with students and those who are, the over, I don't know, 60 or whatever the age limit is, or however they are able to be there. They also can take classes on campus. And so there were some students from that experience and also a couple who talked about the past and the future in a way that was really awesome. There was a panel, part of that, different people, and then different groups worked on kind of different scenarios. And we were teasing, one of them was interspecies, I don't know, communication or something like that. And so I talking to one of my colleagues and I was like, I know it's, I gotta kind of get my hat together and figure out how this works. And then sure enough, this year, there's a whole lot out there now about more interspecies communication. And so we're working on scenarios now. We've had some stuff out there. We've got a website and we're going to be hosting that. ASU, the thought is that it needs to broaden and not be seen as a small boutique thing that started that is hosted there all the time, but we need to broaden that. And so our campus was a natural next step. So we're hosting that this year. It's going to be really terrific. It'll be downtown, probably have about 300 people there. And it's a real point of pride. And again, if you think about it, you think about the pace of change 50 years previous, and then think about what might be ahead. It's pretty amazing. But there's voting going on now for the scenarios, and it's really cool. So that's great. And then I mentioned, I think when we started, that there is the area of academic innovation where UTSA was really one of the early players in that, and leaders is now something that people are thinking about more, and schools are starting to add positions like this. And so we're working with APLU, and we're going to have a day where we're going to bring some of the people together who met over the summer following an APLU event, talk about this, to come back together to really start to. At that time, we shared a lot of what we were doing, shared some common opportunities and challenges and things, and maybe try to put a little bit more meat to this and think about where this might go. So I think the fact that we could influence a national conversation around academic innovation as a more modern way to think about what it means for an institution to have that, because if you have something that says innovation, then you have to create an environment where that can happen. And so what does that look like? These are a couple things that I can think of off the top of my head that really excited about, that are create an opportunity for our team members and our faculty to really engage in different ways. And then to, continually reinforce the recognition that UTSA is a pretty awesome, future-focused, R1 growing institution. And I love being able to play a little part in that too, and influence the profession and work we do.
You go to so many conferences. What are the top ones that you want to model this experience after?
I liked how we did the conference last year, the generative AI one, where I think people felt like they could connect with each other along with learning some things. So I think I want it to feel fun. I mean, we had a playlist for the generative AI one. We're developing a playlist here. We might have some music. We may do some stuff. We're going to do a reception, to kick it off at the Southwest School for the Arts, because I think it creates a really ironic environment to then go talk about the future, because that space is so old. But I think there's so much out there now. I think people want to leave an experience feeling like they've learned something, but that it wasn't just poured into their head, but they leave with a new idea. I like made a new friend, new connections, someone they can follow up with, that they feel like it was a supportive kind of experience, and a little bit personal, and mainly that it was also fun and not super bureaucratic. And so, whatever people who go to that conference, our team is not going to say no. Like, you can't get a size large T-shirt. You can't get, you know what I mean? I want people to feel that, like, the food feels fair and good and a good experience. So, like, all those other pieces that are pain points, where we've been to conferences where you sit for like an hour while food gets served, we don't want those things to happen either, because they impact your mindset when you're at something. You're like, God, I waited 2 hours. I think I'm going to skip the rest of the day. So it's the little things too that don't feel innovative, but they make a big difference.
I love that UT System Conference. It's one of the best conferences I've been to, and I try to attend quite a few. So let me list some, and I want to get your feedback. South by Southwest EDU, ASUGU, UPCEA, like what are in your opinion the best ones? I have limited time and money to spend on professional development.
South by Southwest, the times that I went were a while ago, and it was awesome because I hadn't spent any time in Austin. There is a sense of cool that kind of permeates it, which is really great. At the end of the day, a lot of the focus became more on K-12, which was less what I was doing, pandemic, whatever. So make sure that it's something that you actually care about. GSV is it's like a scene. It's amazing. I mean, every possible new technology will be represented there in some way. It's unabashedly a great place to learn what's coming up, talk to vendors, but not in ways that you do normally everywhere else. It's more future focused and some pretty compelling keynotes. But things that make it memorable are the smaller kinds of experiences you have. A connection with someone, a reception that you went to, an opportunity to hear someone. And so if you want to be somewhere really big, um, that does have a very energetic focus on the future, I would say that's a good place to be. Uh, but it's really big, and so you have to try to, find ways to scale it in a way that you can connect. Otherwise, I think it can feel kind of overwhelming. But awesome. I mean, it's terrific. We'll be there in April, and it's great. And the energy and the focus on thinking ahead is really great, and the opportunity to see both people who've been doing vendor work and technology for a long time alongside emerging startups is really cool. So I think that that's great. I'm on the board for Online Learning Consortium. And so that's a conference that I like the human scale of it. It's usually around maybe 1,200 to 1,700 or so people. So it's big enough that you can hear from a range of different people, but it's not so big that you kind of get overwhelmed and you're like, where do I start? And so part of it is sometimes size of things. You look for things at different points in your life. When you're building something, I want to go to a conference where I can talk to people who've done this so I can learn from them. And then once you've got it built, then you're looking for some different kinds of things. So UPSIA is fun. It's good. It's a little bit of what Online Learning Consortium, there's some crossover, but some of it is also more professional and continuing education, which is great. Love that. So that's a great one. APLU, I love because it isn't overwhelming in size and it is different parts of an institution. So there will be presidents and chancellors there. There will be provosts and academic affairs. There will be student affairs. There is institutional research and data. There is like an university government relations area. And so I actually love that because you see colleagues who work in different areas, which I think is really important. And sessions aren't huge, and research is another area that's represented there. So it really represents all the key areas in higher ed with people representing public universities and land grants. And so it's not everyone, so that those types of institutions, but those tend to be institutions that we, connect with. And they recognize things that are our values. So I think I like APLU a lot too.
In the collaboration process, when people sometimes want to keep their silos, how do I get people to come into the tent and be a part of this collaborative experience the way that you have been so successful in academic innovation?
We got to go back to who our students are. We need to make it easy for our students to get the things that they're interested in. I mean, we don't want them to get stuck in a loop like they were so interested that it's going to take them 6 years to graduate. So we want to make sure that they're on, they're doing what they need to do to keep moving forward. But our students don't always think in the same silos that we do. I think that that's really important because we do inadvertently sometimes create barriers to things that would be good for our students. So there's that. UTSA has taken a more thoughtful approach to how we've implemented kind of budget models, and we use an incentivized resource management model here, which is really about trying to have resources follow where students are. But it also, I think an aspect of that is that it can have the effect of having some people leading different academic areas within departments of wanting to keep them there, because of how money will flow. And again, UTSA has done a really thoughtful job. And so there are, financial resources that support collaboration, that support interdisciplinary work, and I think learn some lessons from other schools who started at this 10 or 15 years ago. But there is sort of that piece of it that's below the surface that people don't see, but I think is something that is thought about. But again, put ourselves in the place of our customers, our students. They don't see those same barriers, so we shouldn't perpetuate them.
That answer. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me about everything from visionary leadership to revolutionary academic innovation programs. Where can people find you online if they want to learn more about Dr. Melissa Vito?
LinkedIn is probably an easy place to find me. You can find me on our website, Academic Innovation, clear place to find me. I'm, at UTSA. You can shoot me an email. I've got other social, Instagram, Facebook, kind of more personal stuff. If you learn that I have dogs, kids, and ride a bike and some of those things. But probably LinkedIn is about as good a place, or just actually through UTSA.
Dr. Melissa Vito, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Ryan.